Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. And joining me today are Peter Godwin and Leah Lane. English-born Peter was in the band Metro with Duncan Browne. Peter wrote the controversial song Criminal World that David Bowie covered a few years later. He also released a solo album and several dance club synth pop friendly singles in the early 80s, of which I still have 3. Peter now resides in Nice, France, and Leah Lane is from Dallas, Texas, just a few miles southwest of me. Singer-songwriter guitarist Leah fronts the goth post-punk band Rosegarden Funeral Party. The band has 2 studio albums, 2 EPs, and 1 full-length cover album to date. As we speak, Leah is currently recording new material. And why, may you ask, are Peter and Leah here together today? Well, if you haven't heard, they are working together on a new project, Regeneration. There is an album in the works and a brand new single, Beautiful Boy, along with a cover of Bowie's Absolute Beginners. Well, welcome, guys.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me.
We're here. I think you're here as well, aren't you, Leah?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having us.
Because you were so quiet there. You were so discreet.
That's what I always say. It's nice to be had, right?
It's absolutely nice to be had.
Yes, thank you.
Well, let's go back, Peter, first with you. Where were you born, and talk a little bit about your childhood?
Wow. I like the way you start with a really kind of easy
talk about your childhood. Yikes.
I was born it makes me want to sort of talk like Monty Python. You know, I was born at a very young age. I was born in London, and that's quite a dramatic story, but it's not a lot to do with how I became beloved of music and making it. But I was born in London and I grew up in the Thames Valley, which is actually a very fertile place, not just because it has the Thames running through it, but because so many rock and roll legends hail from that part of England that's just outside of London. It's just on the edge of London. Up until I was 16, I was there, and so were people like Eric Clapton and Lennon. John Lennon had a house out there, and even Tom Jones had a house in our high street. And Jimmy Page, all these people went to the same guitar shop I did to pick up their first guitars. So even though it was a quiet little hamlet by the river, there was something in the air, you know? And I just had a feeling for music. I mean, to come to the part of this, my life story that's kind of relevant, I guess, to this, I had a feel that my dad picked up on. That's to say, like a lot of kids, they give me plastic trumpets. I even had a plastic guitar, you know, but more like a ukulele, but made of plastic with a picture of Elvis on it. And my dad noticed that I could make a tune out of anything. And so he decided that he would revive something that he'd done as a kid. As a teenager, he was in an accordion band. Well, he was the only accordion player in it, but, you know, there was a little band and it was led by his accordion playing, which was like Irving Berlin, mainly in the key of C. So he wasn't a great accordionist, but he could play, and he learned by ear, and he hadn't played for years by the time he and my mother adopted me, which is a whole other story. And so he said, I'm going to relearn the basics of the accordion, and I'm going to teach you. And that's exactly what he did. And so at the age of 7, what led up to that, you know, list of credits you gave me there, and there are quite a few others as well, but we won't go into that just yet. And I started writing songs, and I was writing poems, and don't ask me why, it was just in me somehow. And I started then, and all through my teens and going to college, I always had a band, rather like Leah, in her own way, was started very young, writing songs and playing live and all that. We have that in common. You know, I was doing it purely by passion and instinct, and who knows why. the soul journey. You know, I was doing it very young, and eventually I got fed up with the accordion because I couldn't really sing. I've had trouble singing and playing it at the same time, particularly when you're trying to get the buttons going and the piano keys at the same time and squeeze box, and then you're trying to sing over the top. Try it sometime, you know. Anyway, so I swapped, much to my father's chagrin, that's French for sadness, I swapped my accordion for an electric guitar. Well, for a guitar, first of all, and then later an electric guitar. And and then I could really write songs. And my first song I ever wrote, somebody later stole the title, but I didn't mind because they made a good song of it. My first song was All Right Now. But it wasn't the free song. Not the song with the killer riff. No. Okay. Even though they were very young, Paul Kossoff, the guitar player, when he wrote that riff, was the same age I was when I started playing guitar. He was 14 years old.
Wow. I knew he was young. I didn't know he was that.
He was 14 when he wrote All Right Now. And so young people can be often smarter than old people, I find. Certainly with the creative matters. So there you go. And that's
I find that too.
She's being autobiographical.
I'm just kidding.
No, but she really is. She is one of the most talented people I've ever met.
Oh,
shut up while I'm praising you.
Well, let's shoot over to let's go real quick.
Let's go to Leah.
Yeah, Leah, to ask you the same questions. Were you born in Dallas?
Yes. So I was born in Dallas, and then meaning my father immediately got transferred by his company to England, and so I actually spent the majority of my youngest years in London as well. But I don't really remember those.
We never met. Can you figure?
We never met. We'd never crossed paths, even though we did figure out at one point that we frequented some of the same restaurants, although he wouldn't have recognized me then. I was, 4. So,
and if I had have recognized her, I would have been arrested.
Wow.
Oh God, Peter.
Yeah. Well, how many years? Yes, exactly. I would confer that. How many years were you in England then?
I think, well, it's kind of, if my memory serves me well, I was there until I was about 5 or 6. And then we moved right back to Dallas, and I started school in Dallas. I grew up always
with an
singing.
English accent. With an English accent. Tell him.
I did have an English accent when I came home. And that was fun while it lasted, I guess.
Okay. We won't hold that against you. Okay.
I hope not. But then I came home, and I'd always sung. My parents have said that I came out singing, and they swear that my first words were Beatles lyrics, but I don't believe them.
I feel fine, maybe. There's so many possibilities. I feel fine.
Really, my favorite Beatles song as a kid was Oobla Di Obla Da, and apparently I would sing that. So my mom was like, "Those were your first words?" Like, those aren't words, and they probably weren't my first.
That's what I was going to ask you, Leah. Do you remember early on when you were a child hearing music being played in the house?
Oh yeah. So in my household, no pun intended, or pun intended, however you figure, but the Beatles were bigger than Jesus in my household. Like, I mean,
don't start that argument again.
But it was religious. Like, if we ever said that we liked another band better than the Beatles, we would legitimately get in trouble. I remember the first time I told my mom that I thought I liked Pink Floyd better than the Beatles, and she just gave me the most stern look, like I had just told her
a withering look.
Yeah, I told her I snuck out of the house last night. She just looked at me like, "You better get in your room." But anyway, at about age 9, I decided that I wanted to play guitar, and so I started playing guitar, and so did my brother, and we both had different guitar teachers. My brother's guitar teacher focused on teaching my brother how to play lead, and my brother has gone on to be a phenomenally well accomplished, just incredible musician.
Who
I
plays on a track that
Yeah,
we
he
might
does.
mention later on our album?
Yeah, he does. He
So,
plays on our
anyway.
album on one track, a gorgeous guitar solo.
Beautiful.
Um,
beautiful.
Well,
and
go ahead.
he so
Yeah,
then
plug
I
him.
started.
Yeah,
Well,
go ahead
sorry.
and give him a plug. I said, go ahead and give him a plug. You can do
Oh,
that.
of course, yeah. Always.
Deservedly so. Deservedly
I'm-
so.
Yeah, I'm always championing my brother. But so then, my guitar teacher noticed pretty quickly that I had an okay voice, and he encouraged me to, write songs rather than focus on, trying to be a shredder. And so I started writing songs about 9
These
years
are the
old.
only options in Texas, by the way.
Yeah, so I started writing songs about
Joke,
9 years old.
jest.
And I was in my first original band by the time I was in the 7th grade. And by the time I was in the 8th grade, I was touring
Remind
nationally.
me what that is in English. I always get confused. 8th grade, 7th grade.
It's like
We don't
12,
have that.
11, 13.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so I was touring nationally by the time I was 12 and 13. And I was playing organ actually at that time in a psychedelic band. And I
Love that.
I'll
I love that.
I'll never understand exactly why I got asked to play organ in that band, because I met the guys that I later asked me to join the band. They were at a restaurant that I was singing and playing acoustically at. So they saw me singing and playing acoustic guitar, and they thought she would be a great keyboard player and percussionist for our band. So I did that for a long time.
Can I just jump in there just with one little thing that is funny, that the very first gig I was ever offered by a band was, I think I was offered for the same reason that Leah was offered the organ job. I was offered to play drums in a band because they liked the cut of my jib, because they liked my look, I'm sure. And I think the reason you got the organ job was, she's got to be in the band. What job haven't we got covered yet? Organ.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
But so then after that psychedelic band kind of ran its course, I started Rosegarden Funeral Party, and I started it with my boyfriend at the time. And all of the songs that make up our first EP, which is called The Chopping Block, and you can find it, are songs that were rejected by my psychedelic band for not being psychedelic enough. And so
I have a parallel with that, although I don't want to make a big deal of it. But there was some of the songs that are my most popular songs of the 80s, Images of Heaven and Babies in the Mountains, were not so enthusiastically received by my band, Metro, which was my band of 3 albums, and actually one of Leah's, I could say, favorite bands, couldn't I?
Oh yeah, definitely like top 3 favorite bands of all time. Metro is, yeah.
I'm not just saying, but she told me this, and then I had to stand up. I had to pick myself up and.
No, I mean it. It's like Roxy Music and Metro. They kind of run Roxy Music, Metro, and probably Japan, but not the early Japan stuff. I find that kind of derivative and uninspired. But when David Sylvian really came into his own with Quiet Life and Gentlemen Take
Leah,
Polaroids.
Yeah, Leah, I would say that you do have, and Leah has one of the most eclectic, broad, educated views of music I've ever encountered in my lifetime.
Well, when you've been into it for a long time, and you have the whole wealth of knowledge of the internet.
But you really do. So this is something we'll come to later if we talk about Regeneration, our band, because it speaks to that. Leah also loves the Beatles, not just because her parents made her.
Well, so just to kind of move past this point. So I started Rosegarden Funeral Party with that boyfriend when I was 18 or 19. And then by the time I was 20, we had broken up in a very painful way. And I kind of went on to use Rosegarden Funeral Party as my healing mechanism for that band. And so when I turned 20, the band started touring just relentlessly. I did 3 tours in 2018, and I did 4 tours in 2019, and then the world shut down. And since I've come back, I've done way more touring since then. I actually think all I know is, without going into too much backtracking and figuring out what tour happened when, I know that Rosegarden Funeral Party has done 10 US tours in the past 5 years, and in about a week and a half we leave for our first tour in Europe and the UK. So
that's got to be exciting. Yeah, you're looking forward.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's nerve-wracking. It's exciting. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned a few artists. What other musicians or bands have influenced your style with Rosegarden Funeral Party?
As far as Rosegarden Funeral Party is concerned,
Yeah.
Everybody, we kind of got like accidentally, or I guess I always tell people jokingly that I fell ass backwards into the goth scene. Like, I didn't know that I was in a goth band until people told me I was in a goth band. So when we released our first EP, I labeled it as alternative or indie or anything. I labeled it as the most ambiguous thing I could label it, and I was thinking that I didn't know where it was going to land. And I was very surprised that it landed in the very warm, open, welcoming arms of the post-punk and goth community. And so when we got told that we were a goth band, I leaned into it very hard. Not necessarily with the music. I kept making the music that naturally comes out of me. Unfortunately, I can't make different kinds of, like, if I'm the sole writer, it's gonna sound like Rosegarden Funeral Party. It'll develop as Rosegarden Funeral Party develops, but I can't hack it, But as far as the look was concerned, I just dove into that world. And so, but the main influences for Rosegarden are actually mainly early 2000s bands like Interpol, White Lies, The National, Editors, bands like that. Those are the bands that were healing my heart when I was going through all this heartbreak that I was writing about. And to a certain extent, those bands are post-punk bands. I mean, to a certain extent, they're neo 80s post-punk bands. They're bands that are taking great influence from the 80s sounds and then kind of modernizing them, which is, I guess, what we're doing. So it makes sense. But I also feel like, we got coined as, the next Susie and the Banshees, because I was a girl,
Right.
I feel like people saw that, I was a girl singing post-punk, and, the first thing they thought was it's Susie. So anytime I, get compared to Susie, it's tremendously flattering because I really like her music and I look up to her as, an amazing trailblazer for women in this genre, and a trailblazer not only for women in the genre, but just for the genre in general. I mean, I think that Susie can be credited for kind of defining goth from punk in a lot of ways.
She was very early, and I must say, as somebody who was there, she was very early in the scene. People forget.
That's what I mean. And that's what I mean. When you look at it in hindsight, because at the time it was all punk, or new wave. But, when you look at it in hindsight, Susie was one of the first people to kind of change or to differentiate the past between what was punk and what would later become known as goth. So it's a big compliment, but I'm more excited by, comparisons to people like Chrissie Hynde or Susie Quattro, because I feel like not only are those comparisons just a little bit more accurate, but those are musicians that I actually owe more to. Pat Benatar was the person who taught me how to sing, is what I always say, because I'd spend hours trying to sound like Pat Benatar.
Yeah,
Anyway, I'll shut up now, but that's enough for me for a while.
No,
But
no. I want to jump in on something because I want to just say something about what you were saying as I perceived you when I met you as an artist, you know, and of course I'm looking at those acts of the 80s are contemporaries of mine, some of them even friends of mine, you know, and I hear it in a different way also because I was in the UK, which is a whole other, you know, time scale and perception of what was going on musically. Things are different once I start to travel to America, to Europe, Japan, wherever. So I had my own view on it, but I heard influences of those original as well as the artists that Leah was referring to, like the National, etc. But I heard those original artists as well, even if I was hearing it, even if it was coming through another, you know, kind of from another angle. I heard them also in her music. But the thing that was exceptional to me from the minute I first flipped onto Leah's Facebook page to see, oh, this girl that's just come to me wanting to maybe do a song together. I wonder who she is, you know. And when I had a listen, the thing that hit me and that differentiates Leah for me from so many artists in all kinds of scenes, including the whatever you want to call it, post-punk, new wave, goth, is her voice. And I think that, you know, for me, Leah is an exceptional voice in a million, a better vocalist than Susie, with all due respect to Susie, you know, who I agree is an innovator and all those things you said she was. But I heard, and what makes Rosegarden sort of extraordinary is Leah's voice and her guitar playing, which is kind of a development of a genre of guitar playing, but beautifully executed with great riffs and things. She really is a very special guitar player for her band, but also that voice, you know. And what's hit me was like, wow, yes, I don't, you know, I haven't spent a life doing duets, but I've done one, I think. But wow, our voices together, that could be something, you know, because her voice already without mine is extraordinary. And I think it's extraordinary in Rosegarden, and it's extraordinary in Regeneration, our band, and it's extraordinary all by itself, whatever Leah chooses to do going forward.
Leah, I had a question. Have you ever been told that your vocals are reminiscent of Lena Lovitch?
yeah, I have, and that's another
Okay.
beautiful comparison. Thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, New Toy, It's You, Only You, Blue Hotel, all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what it is?
Absolutely,
You know what
thank
it
you.
is, Greg? That there's a kind of a thing here, if you want to go into it, is that Leah, as was evidenced on her Great Take Covers album, where she did some amazing versions of men's songs.
Right.
Leah can sing, as she did on a track of Metro's Middle of the Night. She can sing in male keys.
Yeah, I was pretty stoked to discover that I could sing Mercy Street in the original key. It's like, I mean, it's pretty low, but I could
This
do
is
it.
yeah. This is unusual and it's beautiful. And it means also when you put two voices together, you know, as we do on Generation.
I have a deeper singing voice than my brother.
But it's sort of that male tone thing. I mean, Leah can, by the way, also sing very high, beautifully, but it's something you find in a lot of distinctive female vocalists, I think, including a little bit Chrissie Hynde, but especially somebody like Cher.
Oh, especially Chrissie Hynde, because she sings in male registers most of the time. And that used to just kill me as a kid before because girls' voices drop too, you know, like not as dramatically as male voices, but like before my voice dropped and I couldn't sing Talk of the Town by the Pretenders. Oh my gosh, it used to make me so mad. I would try so hard. My dad would just look at me and he goes, "It's not time yet, baby."
But I've heard you singing.
Chrissy,
I've heard you singing like back when you must have been like, I think 13, one of the things you shared with me. And you already sounded like you now. I mean, you know, I think your voice dropped. You know?
I mean, no, it was so funny because I've always been told that I have like a husky voice. And I remember when I was in high school, before I ever even dreamed of smoking a cigarette or smoking anything else for that matter, I used to get asked by teachers all the time if I was smoking. And I was like, no.
I'm not smoking, I'm just smoky. I'm just a smoky girl.
Yeah, and in middle school, they'd call me man voice and like make fun of me because my voice was so deep. But You know, it didn't bother me then, and it certainly doesn't bother me now, considering I've made somewhat of a career off of my man voice. So,
And also, yeah, I mean, in terms of our collaboration,
Yeah.
it's allowed for something extraordinary, you know, to have. It's like we're like sort of, you know, John and Paul in the Beatles. Only one of us is a girl. Because we do all those things that they did, you know, we do all those things like counter melodies, harmonies, unison, when it sounds like one person. We do all those things the Beatles did. Only one of us is a girl.
That's
And
right.
it sounds, and that makes it. I'm not telling you which one, by the way.
Okay. Okay, we'll have to
I
figure
want to
that
be
out.
George.
Well, Peter, I want to switch over to you real quick and talk about briefly how you and Duncan Browne met and the history of Metro.
Okay, just that. Okay, I can. I love your questions, Greg. They're like epic questions. The
Epic.
question alone bespeaks epic. Okay, here we go. How I met Duncan. Duncan was already an established but not especially famous solo artist. He put out an album in the 60s and he put out an album in the 70s that spawned a hit single, a top 20 single in England. The single was called Journey. And I'd like everybody else, because it was in the top 20. And in those days, we only had one sort of music show. Sorry, there's some child being murdered in the background. Okay. I knew that. And I knew Duncan because it was a song I liked. It was kind of, you know, with a kind of almost like a shuffle rhythm and kind of Bach descending Baroque chords. It's what they call chamber pop now, apparently. I don't know, some new genre. There's a young version of it. But anyway, he had this great hit with this beautiful song. And I bumped into him in a pub which has now been turned into a high street bank, would you believe, but a pub called the Prince of Wales. And I just bumped into him socially, random, you know, and we became friends. And he saw me as a bit of a poet. He liked the way I spoke and the things I came up with. And I'm giving you the really condensed version here. But one day, you know, whenever I said something interesting, he would say, can I use that? You know, he knew I wrote songs, but he hadn't heard any songs I'd written. And we were just friends, and he liked the things I came up with. And one day I referred to a friend of ours who had a shawl over her sort of bare shoulders on a late summer's day and in the pub where we were hanging out. And I said, oh, look at Louise's black lace shoulder. And he said, can I use that? Anyway, a few weeks later, I banged on his door. You know, this was before mobile phones, so you just turned up. And I said, do you want to have a drink in Julie's bar, which is a really cool bar that's still there in what kind of wine-oriented bar, wine bars, they called them. And he said, well, yeah, man, but I don't think he said man, actually. He said yes, because he's rather English. And he said, I'm trying to write that song. You remember Black Lace Shoulder? You said Black Lace Shoulder. I said, yeah. He said, I'm trying to write Black Lace Shoulder, but I can't get going on it. And he said, you write songs, don't you? Do you want to have a go at this before we go for a drink? And I said, sure. And that was in the next 20 minutes, we wrote Black Lace Shoulder, really with no effort at all, which is on the first Metro album. And that was the beginning of us writing about 60 songs together, a whole bunch of songs together, some of which went on the first Metro album, some of which went on a couple of later Duncan solo albums. And that literally was it. And in fact, there's another slightly nice twist to the story, which is that we wrote the one song, and it wasn't that we then said, right, let's immediately form a band, let's write lots of songs. I then didn't sort of do any songwriting with Duncan. And what happened was that was September of that year, and Christmas, I went to meet up with a girlfriend who I actually spoke to today, believe it or not, but a girlfriend that I'd met briefly in London. I went to visit her over Christmas, and I took with me my Spanish classical guitar, and I wrote a song called Flame, which also ended up on the first Metro album. And the guitar itself is now in the hands of the lovely Leah Lane, because she deserves it. And I came back in January from Christmas, having written on Christmas Day, most productive Christmas Day I've ever had, Flame. And I played it to Duncan. And that's when Duncan said, that would go, we really should write songs together. And then we wrote a song. The first song we wrote together was called Queen of Tears. And I played that to Leah, having found it. We never recorded it. And I just had the lyric written in a book. And I showed the lyric to Leah about a few months ago. And then I said, would you like to hear the song? Because I can still remember it, although I've never recorded it. And I sang her the song in a demo. And she just, well, I'll let her tell you what she felt about it. But let me just say that we ended up recording it for the Regeneration with the two members of Metro in it.
And that song is unbelievable. I'm a very emotional person. I listen to very emotional music. There's never, and I say this with complete, utter honesty, there's no other song in the world that I've heard so far, and I've heard a lot of music, that instantly brings me to tears like that song. And at the time that Peter showed it to me, I'm so invested in Peter's history. I'm so invested in Duncan. Like I'm a massive Duncan Browne fan. Peter knows this about me. I have 4 copies of his album with Rack, his self-titled album. 4 copies of it, and it goes for like $300.
She bought me one too, in
Peter
case I didn't have one.
Yeah, they go for like $300 on Discogs. I've bought it 6 times total, and like it's because I'm just so obsessed and attached to this music, and I don't want anything to ever happen to it. And so, what I mean to say is, yes, I have this nostalgic bias, and the lyric to this song is incredibly relevant to me and to my life. It is as if Peter was writing about me, not from like, any perspective other than like a loving friend's outside perception of me and of my life. But he was writing about it in 1974, like before I was even, a thing. And like, it's
a prophecy. It's a prophecy, isn't it? It's the strangest thing that happens in songwriting at times. Where
it absolutely was. And that was one of my favorite parts of making this album, was when Peter brought this song to me, because it needed nothing. All of the songs on our album, I did, massive amounts of production work on. So the album is a massively produced album. It's got, orchestral arrangements and, like just horn arrangements and string arrangements, and it's got timpani drums. I mean, it's Phil Spectored out, okay? But
it's very detailed. It's very
detailed. But this song needed almost nothing. And what I love most, what I love most about this song was what it needed. It got from people who were in Metro. And like I'm starting to tear up now, because like it was such a beautiful way to revisit music that is so important with people that have been so important. And I'm not speaking just as a fan of Metro now, I'm speaking as a fan of music, like of someone who just loves the history of music and the development of music over the years. It's an incredible song. I feel like sorry, I didn't mean to cut in that much, but
go ahead and mention the song again one more time, just so for
the song is called Queen of Tears, and it is not released yet. and it won't be released as a single. I would never, ever allow it to be released as a single, but it will come out with the album, and I thoroughly believe it to be a dangerous track, like just because it has the ability to break you. Like everybody that I've shown this song to, and everybody, even my parents, like my parents who are very like stoic and kind of detached individuals, cried. And my, and Peter's, friend who's been, kind of managing his American affairs for, a few years, wept. And he's a grown, strong man.
He's a big Californian, big-hearted dude, yes, and he loves my music and has done since the 80s. And I'm not going to name him because I don't want to embarrass him, but he knows who he is, and he's heard all my music, loved my music since the get-go. But I have never ever seen him well up and start to weep to one of my songs. And I was playing him some of the tracks from the Regeneration album, which, by the way, is called Now Is Forever, which is also a track, and I was just playing some tracks through, and it got to that track, and I just was looking at him, and I suddenly noticed he was weeping.
Yeah.
There is something, I mean, the track moves me. And another strange thing about it as well is that when it came to singing, when it came to constructing it, I did it at distance with Sean Lyons, who was in the original Metro with Duncan, joined a couple of years after Duncan and I started. And he played beautifully guitars to construct it, based on a sort of demo I gave him of me playing guitar less well than him. And it was really in the spirit and reviving that feeling of the first Metro album. And then I had a conversation with him about the importance of just spontaneity in the music. And, and that night I was setting up to sing the vocal on it, the first to get my vocal down on it and sing it through. And just before I was about to just walk away and think I'll do that tomorrow, I thought, I feel like doing it now. And yeah, Sean said, you should always grab those moments, and I'm going to grab it. And I sat down and I sang that song once, and I've never sung it more than once, because we kept that vocal that I sang once. So there's a lot of, and I did lots of ad-libs on the end that we kept, every single one. It's got something about it. There's something about that song that's a bit mysterious, and it's means a lot to me for lots of other reasons, you can imagine, and so wonderful to have shared that with Leah, knowing sort of what it would mean to her. I kind of knew as soon as I saw it in my lyric book, as I was going through this old lyric book.
He didn't kind of know, he knew. Like he knew instantly, and he told me. He messaged me instantly. He was like, I think I wrote a song about you in 1974. I was like, what are you on about? What are you talking about? And it's such a beautiful thing, because it's not what you would think, of like, oh, I think I wrote a song about you. It's not a love song. I mean, it is a love song, but it's not like a typical love song. It's a very platonic and kind of essay like lyric. I mean, it's
a compassionate friend lyric.
It's like a compassionate observation of somebody.
It's a compassionate friend, but with some cutting observations on a certain scene.
I have a copy, and I believe you said, Leah, this was her favorite. America in My Head.
Future Imperfect. Future Imperfect, which was later re-released in America, right? As America in My Head.
Fault, by the way. That's my fault. I suddenly decided on a whim, for God knows why, that Future Imperfect, I never liked it. It had too much of a negative resonance. America in My Head was more where I was at. Let's call it America in My Head, just to confuse, let me say it politely, the hell out of everybody, and just to make life impossible. I renamed it, but we did on the CD. If you have a copy of that CD on Oleo Records, you can flip the artwork and get the original Future Imperfect title and art, or flip it the other way and get the America in My Head art.
That's cool. I have copies of both. I have both an original copy of Future Imperfect from England and then a copy of America in my head from the US. So I have both. But yeah, Future Imperfect is absolutely my favorite Metro album. I think that it's probably one of my favorite records of all time. And well, it is one of my favorite records of all time, but I think start to finish, it's just a work of genius.
I agree.
Yeah, it just is. And like, as much as I love the first Metro record, but the first Metro record to me has, less of something that I am kind of ashamedly a huge fan of, which is pop sensibility. I'm not a very avant-garde person. I love pop music, and I feel like the songwriting on Future Imperfect is so solid and has so much pop sensibility and so much, it's familiar enough, but it's unique and in so many ways that you're getting a new sound that you're already kind of comfortable with. It's in that perfect middle ground where nothing sounds like it, but yet you feel like you've known it your whole life. It's brilliant. And that right there
is such a beautiful thing to say.
and that's the magic sweet spot you want to be when you're making music. You want to be, where you have your own sound, nothing really sounds like it, but yet it's not so off base that no one can connect with it.
Right.
And I think what that is, I think what that is, if I could jump in, is the one thing that I have that, I'm not a great guitar player. I'm not a lot of things. I'm not a great singer, but I have my voice. I have a voice that is me and all that. But one thing that I think is my gift from the gods and even the big God, is I have a gift that's really easy for me for melody and that pop sensibility that melody requires. It
is so effortless for you.
Yeah.
It really is.
I mean, the way we wrote, and where I came up with some of the basis of some of the songs on the album that people will eventually hear by Regeneration, it could just be a conversation we're having. Like Love Me Back was one song that came about like that. And if I'm just fired, or Now Is Forever, it's like, shall I write a song called Now Is Forever? Seeing as we're using it for the title of the album, you give me that. You give me a reason. You give me the belief that I've got a beautiful collaborator that I care enormously for, pushing me on, saying, yeah, write this or do this, and I know she's going to sing it and I'm going to hear her voice on it. That is muse power to the max for me. And with very little muse power, I can bring out these melodies that have, I guess, I would call it that pop sensibility, which is it has hooks and refrains and melody, so a song like our latest single, our first single, a debut single, Beautiful Boy, it's a slow song. It's a moody song and cinematic and textured, but it's actually a hooky song. And a lot of people
absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
Because I can't help but write like that. Whatever style I'm writing, I'm always wanting the strange, the beautiful strange. There has to be that different thing going on. I'm always searching for that. And I love the way that Leah also is always searching for that and brought that with some amazing musicians onto our album and onto Beautiful Boy and our cover of David Bowie, Absolute Beginners, and everything we've touched. She brings the strangeness and the beauty onto it, but I'm bringing through always. I always have work. I find lyrics easy to write. I wrote a whole album with Steve Winwood because of my ability to write lyrics easily. I find lyrics easy to write. I find melodies easy to come up with. I find songs just pour out of me. All I need is a reason for the song to exist. Somebody just give me a reason. If somebody just says to me, could you write 50 songs and nobody will ever hear them? That's one thing. But if somebody says, like Leah did with Love Me Back, she said, well, we've got this session booked in tomorrow. And we were just having a conversation. And I just said, kind of in a lighthearted way, I sort of said, well, you got to love me back. And then she said, that would make a great song title. And then I went, yeah, and it could go, you gotta love me back. And she said, well, could you write it? Because if you write it tomorrow. And so I just said, well, I'm just going to hang up now. 20 minutes later, I kind of sent her a guitar vocal demo of Love Me Back. And the next day, Leah added a little bit of a bridge to it, came up with an amazing guitar riff, which is the heart and soul of the whole thing in a way. And it was made. But, you know, when you've got that kind of process going on, this is not a bad thing to talk about in an interview, actually, because, you know, it is the whole heart and soul.
That's what I was gonna mention with the home recording that, you know, people can do these days. Talk a little bit about that. You know, how you guys are collaborating and
you know, everything is okay. This is funny because I've always been very lazy with technology. You know, I went into all these great studios. My first studio I ever walked into was with George Martin's partner, John Burgess, Air London Studios. My second studio was with Rolling Stones producer Andrew Loog Oldham in Olympic Studios. You know, and I would just go in and other people would do all the technical stuff and that. And when it became possible for us to do it, you know, us being everybody, I used it, but it has to not stop my spontaneity. So the very first song that Leah and I ever wrote together for the album that we've just made, it's called Candle in My Heart. And it's a good example of this because Leah was, you know, playing around on the piano and she was creating, and she created, and she often used to send me things, sometimes sending just for fun, just for my pleasure. She'd send me her singing even somebody else's song or something. But she sent me these chords and she was kind of doodling a little bit vocally at the beginning, not hardly anything, just kind of humming along a little bit. And then she just sent me a whole bunch of chords that were beautiful and I received it. And so it was on piano, on video. So she's just sent me her sitting at a piano, playing piano, some really nice chords, you could say, but it was much more than that. It was, to me, I heard it and it was a song. And I thought of something beautiful that she'd said to me about, you lit a candle in my heart. And I just took that and a couple of other things, let the story start, and things were coming through. And I started singing to the piano with her. She's on video. I'm singing and scribbling longhand, you know, with my fountain pen onto a piece of paper. So multi-technology, and I'm like da 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 da, and then suddenly I've got a song, you know, just literally keeping every chord she played in the order she played them in, and it makes a beautiful song, I think, you know, in my head. And so what do? I'm not much good on piano, although I've got a keyboard. I just transfer it onto guitar, so it's easy for me, and I sing it. And I sing it into my iPhone. And then I send the little demo, if you can call it that, of me singing her song with my melody lyric idea over the top. And the funny thing is, we've got 7-hour time difference to negotiate. That complicates life, doesn't it? And she gets it the next day and she says, oh, I was just sending you something I was working on kind of for me, not necessarily for Rosegarden, but, you know, and in fact, I've written a song with it, but I've heard your song and it's much better. I like your song better. Let's make it our first song, right? So with all these different steps of technology, later, by the way, I must say that I heard the song that Leah wrote in the same time frame, you know, or in the, you know, in our different time zones. And it was actually quite a good song. But I do think our song was better. And then that wasn't the end of it, because then Leah took my guitar, me singing onto my phone, playing the guitar chords back, my version of them, and she turned that into this beautiful ballad arrangement that is the opening track of the album. And I said, look, that's a great song, but we could do more. I want a Hey Jude moment. I want a surprise at the end that nobody's expecting. Let's make it an epic, you know, over to you. You know, and she came up with this fantastic chord sequence and this amazing playing that really adds to the orchestration of it. And then I said, but I want us to have vocal chanting over the, you know, and I created then some melodies for us to chant and kind of put over the top of that in between the instrumentation. And there you have, I think, a pretty good example of modern, multifaceted, you know, international creation, you know, creativity. There's so many ways you can make great music, you know, and that combines the old, the new, you know.
That's fascinating to me, that you don't have to be in the same space physical to create things like, yeah, that's fascinating.
Also because the things that stimulate you to be great, you know, Leah touched my heart and mind with both her soul and the beauty of the person she is, and with some piano chords she played in Muse-like. I then turned that into some kind of alchemy back to her, and she then turned that on to some beautiful musicians who have so much expression of their own, you know. So despite you don't have to be in the same room, as long as you are connecting. You're connecting through the beauty of the music, and you're touching each other. And, you know, the guys that were then, you know, like Dean, who played drums on it, and that everybody is picking up on the vibe and they're adding their thing to it. You know, all great music, I think, if you look at the history of music, how it was recorded, and I think of things like strange things like the story of Bob Dylan doing, you know, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowland with a bunch of Nashville musicians that he'd never met before. And he goes into a room with all these musicians and they start playing a waltz time track that he makes up a lyric ad hoc over the top and keeps playing for about 40 minutes, and they keep 20 minutes of it. There are many ways to spontaneously create, as long as there's emotion, you know, as long as there's love, of, you know, as there's inspiration, there's feeling, you know.
Yeah. How do you feel about your collaborating process?
Oh, I mean, so Peter was telling that whole story. I was thinking as he was doing it, it's a very good example of, you know, kind of his end of the perspective, and you know, what Peter, you know, what this looks like for Peter from his point of view. What it looks like from my point of view is actually far more simple because I'm in the town with the musicians and with the studio. So what I get to do is equally great, but very different. So Peter will write a track, and you know, the majority of the album are songs that were primarily written by Peter, which I must say, as I've said earlier in this conversation with you, that, you know, Metro is one of my favorite bands. So you have to understand, like, the fact that I'm getting to work on songs that are written by, you know, arguably one of my favorite songwriters is an honor and a blessing beyond words. And it's so when I say Peter's written primarily the tracks on this album, that is because I wanted Peter to primarily write the tracks on this album. And, you know, that being said, I have learned so much from the way that Peter writes and getting to work intimately with the way that Peter writes. And it's been like a masterclass. It's been amazing. But anyway, back to my original point. So I'll get a demo from Peter, which will typically be a kind of loose acoustic demo sent in a voice memo. And I will listen to it, and I'll think about the direction I want to take the production. You know, what kind of orchestration and what kind of atmosphere I think will benefit the song best. And then I'll go into the studio with the session players that I've hired to work on this album, and I'll have at least 3 or 4 reference tracks for them. And before they even hear the demo, we'll listen to those 3 or 4 reference tracks a few times, you know, and we'll study them.
Really interesting. That's really interesting as well, isn't it? Because what you're doing and what you were doing is you're sort of like preparing them how to hear this very raw demo that can be heard many ways. You know?
No, exactly. So it's so that we're all like on the same wavelengths when they hear it. And
bringing
so,
them into your wavelengths.
well, yeah, I'm the producer.
And the artist, for God's sake.
And so, you know, like, so I will, so we'd sit down, we'd listen to these songs, you know, and I'd say, okay, well, you hear this element of this one and this element of this one. These are very important. Listen closely to this. And, you know, and then I'd show them the demo. And I said, okay, so we're going to take those elements, and we did this with every song on the record. We're going to take, aside from Queen of Tears, because Queen of Tears didn't need anything. But we're going to take these elements and we're going to apply them to this song. And it worked flawlessly almost every time. There's one song on the record that needed a lot of help, and I couldn't have, I threw my hands up. The only song on the album that I was trying to make a song that sounded like, you know, late 80s Brian Ferry, like Beta Noir era Brian Ferry. And I was in way over my head. And still, the track didn't end up sounding that way. The track has its own personality and its own feel now. But it was the only time in the whole experience where I just was at a loss. So Peter came in, and Colin White came in, and Sean Lyons came in. So Metro came in and saved the day, which of course they did. But you know, and so basically we'll flesh out the track, and you know, we'll make, you know, a demo into a song. And then typically I'm kind of secretive, not kind of, I am very secretive with Peter about what I'm gonna do. Peter will try and guess, but I don't tell him. I just trust me. Just trust me. I know what you like. Just trust me. I can do this. And so,
by the way, let me just say, every single time, this is important. I didn't want it to be what I would come up with. That's something I want to be really clear about. This was the beauty of our collaboration. I knew all the talent that Leah had beyond everything evidenced in Rosegarden. I knew, because I'd also heard the way she worked with other people's songs on the tape cover and all of this. And I thought, I want to set her free with these musicians of hers that she knows and do anything she wants. And not one single time when she came back with the first stage of this is okay, sort of this is where it's going. I never, you know, with the possible exception of the track she mentioned, because we both were a bit confused.
I called him and I was like, I don't know what to do. I ruined it. I don't know.
No, I knew it would be okay. But what I'm saying is, but really, other than that one track or everything else, I just loved what she came up with. And she did things that which are very beautiful and kind of circular. So there's a song called 4 o'clock in the morning. And
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah, well, I just want to say from the sort of my side about this process, it's interesting because she got the acoustic demo of it with me doing a kind of little lick that's very reminiscent of sort of Metro Duncan period and Duncan's solo stuff and that. But that was just sort of me doing the way I can't help it. I did that on Criminal World. I tend to do those things, you know. I tend to strum that way or something. You know, it's something I do in general, you know, when I'm playing a song. So it was just sort of instinctive, whatever. I give her this little guitar phone demo, and she comes back. And what has she done? She's turned the song into a song that Metro could be a Metro track. She's turned it into a Metro track beautifully, even down to some wonderful musical departures that are nothing to do with the song I've written, which is why that she is a collaborator in all the songs from my point of view, because she brought in extra music most of the time, you know, all the time in some regard.
But yeah, we and that song in particular, that day, I'll never forget, I sat them down and I was like, all right, we're gonna listen to these 2 songs 4 times each. And the two songs were Criminal World and The Wild Places by Duncan Browne. So Criminal World by Metro, Wild Places by Duncan Browne. And we sat there and, you know, then we got to work and we did add, you know, different musical departures. And I played, that was one of the few tracks I actually played synth on. And it's a great song. It's going to be our next single whenever we release it.
It's a great song, and you know, but it's also like a wonderful thing to me that, of course, if Peter Godwin of Metro had come up with this song, he wouldn't have created it. He wouldn't have gone backwards in time. He wouldn't have given himself that time machine moment. Because Leah and all of the things she's expressed in this interview about her connection to my music and and her trust and everything in working with me, and my trust in working with her. She created the Metro track that never was. So this album, what with that and I'd sort of written it. It is in the writing somewhere, but she immediately identified it and ran with it, you know, all the way to the finishing line.
Well, I'm lucky. I know a lot about Peter just from, you know, writing, or it's just from listening to all of his music so much. So like getting to be getting to be in charge of the way that this album was produced, you know, it became like this like really wonderful exercise in like trying to please Peter, like, but also not telling him anything. It's like not taking any direction from him, but constantly getting excited to bring something to him that was going to please him and make him excited. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it was kind of a roll of the dice every time, but the dice were loaded. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, also I would say as well, like not only was I always pleased, if ever I came up, because I'm a person that's got 100 ideas a minute, I can't help it, you know, whether it's songwriting or whatever, I'm always, you know, that's how I am. I'm bound to have opinions. I always liked what she did, but if ever I said, and can we add this, or can we do this, or can we, again, Leah never stopped me. It was never like, oh no, you can't do that, or you can't do this, or don't mix it like that, or no, I don't. No, everything flowed back and forth. Every little exchange we had, and later on when I came in a bit on the mixes and things, you know, we didn't fight about anything. We didn't disagree about everything at all, you know, which is unusual. I may mention it because it's unusual. I've been in bands, you know, I've been in 2 versions of Metro, you know, even with the loveliest people in the world, the greatest talents in the world, it's very easy to come, as I did with the guys in Metro, who I love to death and who are incredibly talented. And still I like to work with them. That's why Colin White and Sean Lyons are on two and a half, I would say, tracks on the Regeneration album. But you know, it's very rare what Leah and I have had flowing between us this whole process. It's not something you'll encounter every day in music. Bearing in mind that before the beginning of the year where we started doing this with Candle in My Heart, we didn't know each other, right? We'd never met.
Yeah.
I mean, Leah knew something of me through my music, and you can know me through my music, in fact. And when people say to me, what does that song mean? You know, what does Images of Heaven mean? I say, honestly, Images of Heaven is the best expression of what it means. So if you've got a moment, have another listen.
Well, let me ask you guys this: in conversations between the two of you about music or anything, do you ever finish each other's thoughts? You know what I mean? Does that ever happen?
like musically, do we ever finish each other's thoughts? I feel like musically,
or
I feel
just
like,
personally. It could be musically or just in conversation about anything.
oh, absolutely. And I feel like the album itself is one giant finishing each other's thoughts. Because you know, it's you know, Peter's initial idea and my I guess execution of it. So he brings it and to the chopping block, and I, you know, bring down the guillotine. It's a really gory,
a savage metaphor. But I think as well, I think there's something as well here that this whole album was over a long period of time, and it's kind of an emotional journey, the album, on all kinds of levels, which are for the listener to discover in their own way, in their own time. But there's a lot of emotional narrative, not only with Queen of Tears, with Candle in My Heart, Beautiful Boy. There's a lot of emotional narrative that gives, I think, the album a lot of depth. And it came through in everything, in the writing, in the way we worked, in the way we went back and forth on this. Even if we go forward and we make other albums, which is not impossible, you know, we will never make this album with, this is a unique piece of art, if I can be so grand as to call it that, because of the way, all the factors that swirl around it and run through it, and the total intuitive, instinctive way it proceeded. There was no calculation, there was no sitting down between her and I, where we sat down and said, so what kind of album are we going to make?
That was a huge thing about the album, is that like Peter and I have one kind of agreement, and that was that there was no rules. Like we weren't going to pigeonhole ourselves. We weren't going to, say, oh, okay, well, I am in a goth band and people like Images of Heaven, so let's make a synth pop dark wave album so that everyone will be happy. Like we don't care if everyone is happy. We wanted to make art, and that's what we did. And at the end of the day, it's not about whether this album goes top 20. It's about the fact that this album was made, and this album is beautiful. And Peter and I are artists. We're not chasers. You know what I mean? We're not chasing some clout or trying to, basically commit fan service.
You have to be happy with the product first and foremost.
Well, and like I feel like for Peter and I, like we just wanted to make beautiful music that kind of expanded beyond any of the, kind of pigeonholes or boundaries that were put upon us like at any points in our career. Because I know Peter might have felt like, he was obligated to make a certain kind of sound at some point in his life. And I certainly feel obligated to make a certain kind of sound.
I must just say, I always disobeyed, and then I have people like say, for example, like even just like yesterday, somebody said, when you first did Babies in the Mountains, I was disappointed it wasn't another Images of Heaven. And I know that happened, and now everybody thinks of them as equals, kind of in there. So you have to be smart. You don't, when you make art or whatever you want to call it, you want to make something original and beautiful and something, give a unique experience of some kind. You try and think beyond what the audience want to what they will want later. What will they want later? And I've got people wanting today the first Metro album or Future Imperfect that have only discovered it yesterday. Because if you make something good enough, touching enough, moving enough, original enough, special enough, it will find eventually. I truly believe that it will find its audience. And that there was one, there's just one other thing that I wanted to throw in line with what Leah was saying there, that one of the things that I said sounds very grand, and I have said it before, but I think it makes it clear the point of view. I always said, and Leah and I have said many things amongst us, observing the album we made, not planning how we were going to make it. And I said, this album is like our Sgt. Pepper. And the reason I say that is because it has no genre. It doesn't obey any rules, just like that album. Now, the core is in the identity of us as artists and our vocals very much, as the Beatles had a very distinctive vocal kind of emotional character to deliver the songs, whatever the style of the songs. We have a very strong character that we've created, again, with no calculation, purely what will work on this song. How should we sing this song together? And we just did every song according to, just as Leah did with the production, with the vocals, we decided it for each individual song. And it gives a core and a heart and identity, but it allows the album to be many things from many generations, hence regeneration. Influenced by many generations of music, us from different generations with many generations of influence within us, Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put. And, just to your point, the only rule that I put on myself when fleshing out the tracks for this album was that I didn't allow myself to ever get kind of comfortable in a sound and repeat myself. So I made sure that every track on the album was distinctly its own. And when I say distinctly its own, I mean very distinctly its own.
Yeah. So when it came to putting the songs in an order, where there is an order for those that like to listen in an order, it needed a bit of magic, and I think we found it. But to sort of make that journey, but it is its own journey, and you're absolutely right.
They all sound like movie scores, or like themes to a movie, but they're all completely different movies.
Yeah, but there's something in there, I think myself, that comes through our voices that we're telling. The
I mean,
storytelling.
you put it perfectly when you made the Sergeant Pepper allusion. But I just mean, as far as the orchestration is concerned, it's every song is vastly different, which I think that there's no downside to. Because
do you know what I love about that as well? What I love about that is that has been my credo, and I took it from Ezra Pound, the American poet. He said this thing, make it new. And that was from Metro, from the first album we made, and I remember saying that to Duncan, because I was actually doing a PhD on American poets at the time, and I said, let's make our credo, make it new. So if we hear a track on the Metro album sounding too much like something we know, we get rid of it or we change it. And this album follows, Leah followed instinctively, intuitively, spiritually, emotionally, that same idea. And it so appeals to me. It's so much my philosophy of music. Like, when people sort of say, oh, are you doing a cover of Images of Heaven on your new album? Why? I've done that and you liked it. Great. But you always want to search for the new, and even within an album. Why not? I love it. I love that Leah has that attitude and that she did that, and she approached it that way. And it's all part of the magic of our collaboration, which is I'm just hugely grateful to the heavens for, frankly.
Well, talk a little bit about Beautiful Boy. I like the video. I must say I like the video.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel so bad, but I've got to run, and I'm going to let Peter talk about Beautiful Boy. I've got to get to this recording session, but I do want to say, making this record with Peter has been the greatest thing that I've ever done creatively in my life, and I am so grateful for everything that I've learned, not only about music, but about myself through this experience and through knowing Peter. And, Beautiful Boy is my favorite track on the album. And Peter and I were kind of unanimous when we decided to release that as our first single. If you knew all the songs on the album, it wouldn't strike you as the obvious choice for a single, but that's kind of exactly like that. That's what Peter and I do. We don't make the obvious choices, and we don't make the obvious choices, as individuals, in our lives, and we don't, and in the way that Peter and I know each other, we don't make the obvious choices, and we also don't make the obvious choices musically. And so I want to touch on one more thing. I'm glad you like the video. I love the video, and the video was shot in Nice, where Peter lives, and we filmed each other, and then I edited the video in iMovie. So it's a very grassrooted video, and it was intended to look that way. It was intended to look intimate and look personal and look like just two people filming one another with love and with friendship and with compassion. And sorry, phone's dying. And I'm really glad that translates and that it won your heart, because I thought, when I first kind of watched it back and when we were making it, I knew that it would win the right hearts, because it's a sweet video for a sweet song. So thank you so much for having me.
You said, sure. I just wanted to leave you with one thought when you said not going the obvious way. Taking the road less traveled, and it made all the difference, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Robert Frost.
Yeah, we love Robert Frost. Yes.
Yeah. So there you go.
But thank you so much for having me today, Greg, and I'm excited that you get to talk to Peter. Without me chiming in for a bit, because Peter has a wealth of knowledge that I can't even begin to touch. But just know that it's been an honor talking to you today, and thank you for all of your insightful and interesting questions, and allowing me to share my part of this. So thanks.
And you are neighbors, by the way. Don't forget.
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
we're
Sorry, I
20.
had to cancel that show in Houston. That's a story for off the air, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can, now that you're going, Peter and I can share some really deep, dark secrets and
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
the dirt is going to be spilled. Yeah.
Well,
right.
It's
boys,
Scandelabra.
All right.
have a
Yes.
great one.
Yeah.
All
Have a
right.
good session and
Okay. Yes. Have a good session. And
Thank
see
you.
you soon. See you soon, sweetheart.
okay.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
thank
Bye,
you, Leah.
guys.
You
Thank
look
you.
great. Okay. Oh, now I've got another position on the screen.
There we go.
So I can kind of add a little bit to Beautiful Boy, although you know
Okay.
that
Okay.
was all true and all beautifully put by Leah. The song actually, again, it's one of those quite where Leah used to say this thing to me about being a beautiful boy, which as a man of some years, I don't immediately think of myself as a boy, but in another way, I actually, certainly not as beautiful, but I certainly think of myself in another way as a beautiful boy, because like a lot of people, but particularly like artists, the boy inside me is very much alive and kicking. And I heard George Harrison, who sadly, of course, died in his late 50s, cancer, but just before that, he was talking about how, when you're 40, when you're 17, and then the next day you're 57, those 40 years, they fly by and you feel the same person. You don't notice it. You can feel the same person when you're 57 as you did when you were 17. It's just a lot of things have happened, days have gone by, and I sort of feel the same way, and I think what Leah saying that, it was sort of, and it was something she would repeat, and she'd sort of tease me with it as well, because, of the ways that I would react to it. But I knew what she meant. And I thought it was a beautiful starting point, beautiful point for a love song, And also, we're allowed as a man and a woman singing, not just to sing in the conventional duet way, but also in almost a transgender way, where you don't, the words can work, whether two of us are singing the words, or
Right.
either one of us is singing the words, or or both of us are singing the words. I've already said that, but it can work in any way. It's purposely that way. And again, it's one of those, like Candle in My Heart, that came from something she said, that came from our life and things we were going through, that came back in. But it's about a bigger truth, that we're all beautiful and we all should keep the young, beautiful energy in us alive forever, and art often feeds on that in some way. Self-expression, call it what you will, it feeds on that. And so, and then the way that Leah then treated I sent her a little guitar demo of this, and I actually play guitar on that song as well, which is unusual because I think I play on 2 tracks on the album. And I play this guitar that is a story in itself, because Leah was in France, Leah was in Nice with me, and she asked me one day, what was my first electric guitar? Which I sort of referred to in passing earlier in this interview. But basically I said, well, I went to this guitar shop where all these Thames Valley, rock legends went to, and got my first guitar that I swapped for my accordion, my first electric guitar, which was a Futurama, and it wasn't very good. And I didn't enjoy playing it, but my friend at school had a Watkins rapier. Watkins, an English guitar maker, when you couldn't, first of all, you couldn't get Gibsons and Fenders in England. There was a trade ban. And then when they were so expensive that only, Hank Marvin from the Shadows could afford to buy one. And so these English companies came up making, and one of this company Watkins, was just around the corner. I found out years later, from Sunbury-on-Thames, where I was living as a young boy and an adolescent. And I said I used to like playing my friend's Watkins rapier because it was so much better than my Futurama. And it so happened that Leah was suffering a bit from jet lag, and while I was sleeping, she found. I'm going to show it to you.
Okay.
she found this guitar in perfect condition, a Watkins Rapier from the very year we were talking about.
Yeah, look at that.
And I play that with bottleneck, all that slidey, spacey stuff on Beautiful Boy. It's played on the Watkins Rapier. That was my surprise. Guess what I got you last night?
Wow.
Right?
Where did she find it?
Online. I mean, yep. She until very recently has worked for years in a guitar shop. She is incredibly knowledgeable about guitars in general, and she can even set up guitars. There is a person with many hidden talents, and not so hidden talents, but and so she just went. She knew where to look, and well, it was luck as well. It was destiny. It was whatever you want to call it. It's fortuitous. So the guitar is also part of the Beautiful Boy story because it ends up in the recording with me playing slide on it, and I don't generally feature myself on guitar on my albums because I always feel the guys that are the other guys in the band or whatever are better than me. Although okay. I'm sometimes been used by people like Johnson Somerset, who I did dozens of remixes with him where he'd bring me in to play. It could be anybody, Brian Ferry, Simple Minds, Adele, I don't know, I've lost count, Bjork, Katy Perry, I did 7 for her, where I come in and I play my kind of guitar, which isn't Eric Clapton, it's not blues, it's something that I do, it's sort of sonic. And so I'm sometimes brought in for some version of guitar playing, but I'm not a great guitar player, in my opinion. And that's why I've always tended to use other guitar players, and a guy called Mills is playing most of the guitar on this album beautifully, I might say, but often guided by, almost always guided by Leah in the studio to great effect. Yeah.
Well, any plans on any of the other tracks, doing videos for any of the other tracks?
Well, it's funny you say that because that's a conversation I'm actually having with Leah tomorrow. Okay. She's playing in London, and she was going to play in Paris, but that got cancelled, and we suddenly have a few days there, and we're looking to see if we can find a way, and we may, and I haven't even discussed this with Leah, so I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but we may even do something similar to the story that we told, because in a way, the video for Beautiful Boy it's a video of that song, but it's also the video almost of the album. It could almost be any song is telling the same kind of sort of mysterious love story in different ways. It's telling it in different ways. So we may do something in London where we use London and us in London, and in a similar way to what we've done in Nice, do another little homemade kind of story, but with a different location.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which I think might not be, what do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I do.
I think it would be quite charming. I've never been a great fan of lip syncing, although one thing I will mention in this interview, I think, is the first collaboration actually that Leah and I did was for her Take Cover, a series of covers with featured artists or featured friends, and that doing either singing along or doing different, or playing something or doing featured in some way. Leah wanted to do a Future Imperfect track, and she chose, much to my surprise, until I started listening to it, she chose Middle of the Night. And I'd forgotten about Middle of the Night. It's a song I wrote with Colin White, the guitar player, and I suddenly realized it was a really good song, but I'd forgotten that it was, and we ended up doing that for Take Cover with me singing kind of down the octave on the choruses and over the bridges. And if you go on YouTube, I don't know if you've seen it. Have you come across it?
No, not yet. I will.
But you might enjoy this. You put in Rosegarden Funeral Party, and anybody out there who's watching or listening, you put in Rosegarden Funeral Party, Middle of the Night, and it will maybe it says featuring Peter Godwin, but just with that, you'll find it. And it was shot, again, I filmed her, she filmed me on the terrace where we were having this interview earlier. The two of us, just on that terrace, and then we put the camera and it filmed both of us. And then Colin played guitar, recaptured his guitar from the Metro track in Australia, where he's a a professor of much renown of politics, and he plays beautiful guitar still. He got filmed by his wife in Australia, and then she went back to Dallas, filmed the band playing the song. So it's got 3 locations, this humble little video. It's a wonderful version of the song. She sings it better than me, but almost identically to the spirit of the way I sang it originally. And then I sing along to her, this time going down the octave, so that there's a distinction between us. But that was the first thing we actually did together, you know, before we even wrote our first, I'm not sure if it was before we wrote our first song. No, it wasn't, but it was the first thing that was out there with us.
Okay. Well, I know you said before we did this, when we talked before, that you really didn't want to focus too much on the past. But now that it's just me and you, would you mind if I showed you the 3 singles that I still have, the vinyl, and of course.
Oh yes, Lisa Vanderpump and a man in an Anthony Price suit.
Yes. And
silk blue suit. I love that suit.
That was another favorite of mine, though. Torch Song for the Heroine.
Well, there's a story about that.
Okay.
There's a story about that you might like, which is, Mitch produced it, and it was the first release of me as a solo artist. So it was the first solo single I put out in the UK. Before that, mini album was out in America. You know, so the first actual single was Torch Songs for the Heroine, and there's a version on the B-side called Torch Songs Ballad. Not on there, you won't find it there. But if you bought the UK single, it was on the B-side, right? It was a slow instrumental version. And that version, that B-side, is on a digital release of my mixes, including Razormaid mixes, John Luongo New York mixes, and B-sides, including I think French Emotions and Spoken Images, which was the B-side that was used in the Images of Heaven kind of cut up that became a remix of Images of Heaven by Razormaid. And they used a mixture of my 12-inch version, the single version, and Spoken Images, which was the UK flip side. Now that's all coming out on the 5th of May, this collection of material that some of the most fun stuff, including John Luongo's fantastic kind of backwards tape stuff where it sounds like he's scratching and everything, on Babies in the Mountains, which was actually the biggest dance hit I had in America, #4 in the Billboard dance chart, even bigger than Images at the time. So that's coming out, that's timely, you know, that's coming out on the 5th of May, and it'll be there on, you know, in 238 countries. That's not Russia and Belarus, by the way. And that's why it's not 240. And there will be, what was I going to say? There'll also be, well, last year, Polydor reissued digitally the rest. So now all the Polydor material is out there. The rest being, I think that Torch Songs for the Heroine 12-inch that you have there, but the single version, which is different from the 12-inch, will be on this new collection. Don't want to confuse you, but basically, on the 5th of May, everything will be that I ever did, B-sides, remixes, everything, as Peter Godwin in that period for Polydor, will be out there.
Yes. Well, also another track that's on this, on side 2, Emotional Disguise. That's another favorite of mine too.
Well, that instrumental that I can see flashing up there, that's also in the new release package.
Okay.
So if you're in a DJing mood, you can do what Jelly Bean Benitez did. This is me in New York in 1983 at the Fun House. I get invited by Jelly Bean Benitez, who later remixed, you know, Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney, you name it, he remixed it. And he was a fan of Emotional Disguise, especially, and my stuff. He said, we're going to have a Peter Godwin night at the Fun House in Manhattan. You going to come? I said, sure. Thank you. Great. I went along with my manager, friend, Don Rousseau, and who else was there that night? at this Peter Godwin night? Well, there were some interesting characters. One, Madonna was there. Madonna at that time was going out with and produced by some of the tracks, Jelly Bean Benitez, for her debut album. She was at #1 in the Billboard dance chart at that time with Holiday. I was at #4 in the same chart that week with Babies in the Mountains.
Yeah.
Who else came that night? A singer of a rather famous band, Ralph Hutter, singer with Kraftwerk.
Yes.
You know, second hugest influences after the Beatles, maybe on popular music and dance and everything else. He was there too at the Peter Godwin night. And to round it off, who else was there? A load of kids from Brooklyn and over the bridge coming in, as they were starting to do at that time, to break dance in Manhattan nightclubs and blow everybody away. And the first time I saw breakdancing was to Jelly Bean mixing the Emotional Disguise instrumental, the French Emotions B-side, the regular version for about 30 minutes back and forth with these kids, you know, spinning on their heads.
Well, I was a DJ for a time at a club in San Antonio, Texas, back in 1986.
Okay.
And I used to play Images of Heaven and Emotional Disguise as often as I could. And they were real.
Thank you. Belatedly, thank you.
Yeah, they were real. I wish I'd known you back then.
Those were flawed. You know, those. There are people still. I get film of people at Numbers in Houston, for example, dancing to Images of Heaven. You know, they still roll out those tracks. You know, which is. I did a performance at Numbers. You know, we won't tell the. Frontier or Polizei about it, but I did sneak in and do a performance. You know, one of the big issues in America is if you want to come and play as an English artist, you have to get a very complicated work visa permission. So it limits you somewhat. People are always saying to me, why did you come play America? It's not like I don't want to. It's just that it's extremely complicated to get that first visa permission, you know.
Yeah, I've heard that.
That's another story. But you know, it's amazing to me that people still, and not just in the States, although very much in the States, but also in Europe. You know, I did a show in Belgium in 2018. It's a wonderful event called W Fest, as in wave, as in New Wave Fest. And they've been going for a few years and they're still going, and they get artists like, the year I did it, there was also Midure was there, A Flock of Seagulls were there, ABC were there, OMD were there, I believe, a Human League. You know, they get all the 80s artists to play this big festival. About 30,000 people came the year I was doing it. And there's still a huge love of that music, and not all the people loving it were alive when it was first around.
That's very true, isn't it?
Like Leah.
Yeah, like you said, but good music is going to travel through time, and people are going to pick up on it, and they do. Well,
you know what? Like it every day on YouTube, especially sometimes on Facebook or Instagram, I get somebody who says, "Hey, I'm 18. I'm just listening to this, and it could be Criminal World, it could be Images of Heaven. What else you got? This is great." You know, new generations, because of people complain about streaming, and I know why, and I'm part of it in the sense of, you know, it's harder to make money when it's not a physical product and all of that, and streaming is more like radio play. But the truth is, and I must just drop something in for Leah's band. Leah recently passed well over 1 million streams on one of her Rosegarden songs. She has several million streams for her songs, so she has an audience. But going back to the whole issue of streams and YouTube, which is also streaming, it has to be said that has opened the world to the history of recorded, not only, but including the history of recorded music is available for you as a 15-year-old to decide, do I want to listen to the Pink Floyd, or do I want to listen to Lady Gaga, or do I want to listen to, you know, to an artist who just put out their first record yesterday? Everything, whatever you like. You can be your own DJ, your own tastemaker, your own influencer. You don't have to be told what to like. It's all there. And isn't that wonderful, right?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, the internet and technology in particular is a double-edged sword. You know, there's the good upside, and there's, you know, the evil side, as they say. But yeah, one thing, today you can reach so many more people, like you said, than back
Even
in
though, you know, even back in the day, I was getting releases in 100 countries with Polydor, you know, still.
Right.
But the other thing as well is, you go through music, if you talk specifically about the music business, without going into in any detail whatsoever, one thing I say is, since the 50s, probably the 40s, but I know all kinds of dark deeds have been perpetrated upon creatives, you know, whether they were songwriters, musicians, singers, artists. They've, you know, including some of the most famous, the most renowned, and some of them, you know, were stolen from consistently. Even when they were making a living, they were still being robbed, you know.
Very true. Yeah.
It's a dirty business.
Well, did you, when you released Images of Heaven, did you feel you had a hit on your hands, or did you feel like it was a really good song that people would be attracted to?
It was one of my kind of, what I call like my Mozart songs. What I mean by that is that it came to me and I just wrote it down, you know, like Mozart apparently said. It came to me and I just wrote it down. I did it, it was written, as was Babies in the Mountains, on the first day of the 80s. I wrote that after a night out in a club, leaving a bit early because I was a bit bored, but it was after midnight. I got home, I had a song in me and wrote Babies in the Mountains. I wrote Images of Heaven around the same time, actually. And I didn't think anything other than that I liked it and I loved what it had to say for all those that would get it, you know, all the things it had to say. But I never thought of it as a hit. But then when we produced it and recorded it with George Kiyanis as a producer, great producer, and, you know, very sympathetically captured that, I did think this probably should be a hit. And I think because I was with Polydor and I didn't have an album out, and the single came out on the mini album, and then the single in relate, you know, there was no real budget to push that song. And I remember it got into the breakers. It was a hit in the dance chart, but then it got it in the top 20. Then Images got into the breakers. It got into like 101 in the national chart with no radio exposure other than WLIR trying to help it along, and some state, you know, and San Antonio college radio. Yeah, there were people trying to help, but, you know, the vast amount of stations and FM radio and all this were ignoring it because it didn't have a guitar on it. Only, guess what? Actually, most of the synth you think is synth is actually electroharmonics guitar synth played by Colin White from Metro. But there you go. But you know, they didn't think it had a guitar on it, and so it wouldn't go on FM and this and that. You know, so it should have been a hit, I think, in America, Images of Heaven. I honestly think, it sounds vain to say, I think it should have been. And I was at the year it was released, I was at the New Music Seminar in New York, and there was a panel of record labels. You know, they have all these panels and things at the time, and there were all these people from the industry in the room, and somebody suddenly shouted out as a question from the floor to the panel, you know, one of the guys was from Polydor on the panel, and they said, how did Polydor manage to lose Image, you know, not make a hit out of, oh, I forget how he expressed it, but, you know, how did they not have a hit with Images of Heaven? And I happened to be in the room, you know, I was in the room just attending some of the seminars out of interest, and somebody just raised a question from the floor, sort of chastising Polydor, you know, and I thought, yes, thank you, yes, explain please. But it's all to do with budgets and priorities and the massive job in those days, and in these days too, of getting your music. You know, we need people like you, you know, we need champions, you know, getting your music to the public. It's not easy, you know?
Yeah, well,
it feels to me it's easy to make it, but then, you know, with 75,000 people a day putting a new track on Spotify, then try to get your head above the parapet, you know? Right.
I mean, there's so much competition. That's the downside of technology and the internet.
It's so many stars in the sky, Greg, and which one has got life on it? And where's your spaceship? How much time do you have to visit and find out?
See, right. Well, I have two more, Peter. Here we go. Remember this?
Yeah, I'm trying to see which one. Is it the Cruel Heart? Yeah.
Yeah, Cruel Heart. It's like I have to do everything backwards than the way I want to when I put something up here. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I got it. I can see it. And the girl in here's it, just to confuse people entirely. The girl there
Yeah.
in that cover.
Mhm.
The other one was Lisa Vanderpump, who now is a reality TV star,
Okay.
but she was a model. This lady, who will remain anonymous, is
Uh-huh.
also leading the star of the Images of Heaven MTV video, we call it, because there was a video that preceded that was considered too racy, too sexual to be used on MTV. So we did another video. They were both homemade videos done for a few $100, and the one that is, you know, doesn't have any glimpses of nudity in it, but basically is the one that has that lady in it. And also my apartment is featured in it, my apartment in London at the time. Yeah. Just a little bit of, you know,
well, yeah, I like those
insider information for you.
Yeah, insider back stories. And I think the viewers will enjoy that too. And then the last one that I have for everybody, just a picture of you.
Done by the way, Peter Ashworth did all those photos we've looked at, and he is a fantastic photographer. He has a real style. That was just shot back of King's Cross Station.
Okay.
And Neville Brody did that artwork. And Neville Brody's still a friend of mine on, you know, connecting through Facebook and that. And I love the sort of finger painting he did of the texture of the framing around the photograph. And he did the Correspondence album cover. And he was doing my covers around that. There's a period with roundabout Correspondence where he's doing, you can recognize his artwork, because Neville Brody was the what would I call it, the graphics guy that, you know, who created the whole style of a magazine in England called The Face. And The Face was The Face was very influential both in its music taste. It went from the black and white of the NME, the New Musical Express, to the color of the 80s sort of forward-looking, you know, stylish acts of all different descriptions, whether it was The Cure or the Human League or whatever, that we were all coming through The Face. And Neville Brody was the guy that created the style and the look of The Face. And he's still out there, and he's a very talented man.
Wow. Well, did he also come up with the logo, the PG? Okay.
Yes. And isn't it brilliant? Yes, he did.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's simple, but
I love that. The simplicity of it. Yeah. Very talented guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, I still
tag him.
I hold on to those. Yeah. So you can tell.
Don't turn them into ashtrays. You know, I know that people are melting, and you know.
I'm not going to do that. But you know what? I learned my lesson early on. I had been told, don't leave vinyl in the car in the heat. I had been told that, but for some reason I didn't pay attention one day, and I was out vinyl hunting. This is way before CDs, and I was buying records, and I left a couple in the car in the back seat in the summer in Texas. You know, I learned my lesson.
That's a cruel lesson.
Yeah,
that's a cruel lesson.
And you talk about this was like, I mean, you know what I mean? It's really warped. You know, the true sense of warped. It was, and I was like, oh my God. At least I didn't spend a pretty penny on them. You know, at least it wasn't a lot of money, but it wasn't.
Well, you also got a lesson. A lesson was learned, which is always good in life, right?
That's right. Never did that again. Never did that again.
Yeah. That was it.
And I wanted to ask another thing. Looking on your Facebook page, speaking of Midge Ure, I saw a picture of you. I don't know how old it was, but you and Midge, and it looked like it was a festival. Maybe was it a festival? Music festival?
I bumped into Midge, quite frankly. I mean, Midge and I, back in the 80s, we were both living in London. Midge was living in London at the time. We were very close friends. We saw each other quite a lot. We went to the same clubs. We even went on double dates, you know, at certain moments in our lives. We were good friends, and that's another reason as well that he came in on. I met Midge there's a video of me singing Criminal World on Hits a Go Go on YouTube, which is actually very good quality. And it's got a lot of German before of us walking from the aeroplane kind of into the TV studio with German description of us over the top. And I happen to speak German, and a lot of the stuff they're saying is complete rubbish about, inaccurate, let's kindly call it. But then there's a nice clip of us singing Hits the Go Go. First TV I ever did, April 1977. And on that same show, I met a young man called Midjur playing with Slick. This is before he became even more. He played with the Rich Kids and then Ultravox and Visage and everybody else and Live Aid and you name it, and solo career. I met him then, and I was doing Criminal World, and he was doing, I think, Forever and Ever by Slick, pure pop, so that's when we first met, and then we knew each other. We're both in a Visage video in one of the clubs, the Blitz, that we used to go to, and we lots of interconnection. So whenever we see each other, our lives are very apart, but whenever we cross paths, like when I did WFest, I hadn't told him I was doing it, and I came actually the night before because I saw he was on. And anyway, it was better to get there the night before than rely on a flight on the day you're singing. And I just sort of saw him. He was talking to somebody backstage, and I just went, "Hi, Mitch," And that might have been a photo from there. There's also photos of us that I was at a gig he did when Ultravox did their comeback and they hit London, and they sort of got back together again with Warren Cann for the first. Warren Cann, by the way, who plays on Images of Heaven, in case you hadn't never noticed.
Right.
But,
right.
And there's pictures that come up on Facebook of us backstage after that gig they did at the, I think more than one gig they did at the Apollo. There's a few pictures around because whenever we bump into each other, I was introducing WFest as the MC of the whole 5-day festival in, I think it's 2019, the year after I played it. And he was playing it that year as well. And there's a picture from then, so you often get pictures of, it's not contrived. It's just whenever we bump into each other, it's like, oh, yeah. Or somebody wants to take a picture usually. It's like, oh, can we have a picture together? And, so we usually end up with a photo opportunity. Yeah. Great guy, by the way.
Yeah. Oh,
basically,
yeah.
Mitch
That's an interview right there I would love to have. Yeah. With Midge. Oh, man.
Midge is still singing those songs. I just have to say this. Those songs, Ultravox songs, and others, but particularly the Ultravox songs, in the keys he recorded and sang them in 30, whatever it is, years ago, 40 years ago, some of them. Amazing voice, amazing artist, charming man, gentle, unpretentious, and modest. I mean, the whole Live Aid thing, from the Christmas single into the global event, owes so much. No disrespect to Bob Geldof, but it owes so much to Midjur. And Midge was never one to push himself to the front for credit or for accolade, but he deserves it.
Yeah, I would. I would love to have a chance to talk with him. Well, coming back up to the current, in a way, I guess it's come full circle for you, a la Bowie, with his cover of Criminal World, and now you guys doing Absolute Beginners.
Well, what's funny about that is that a couple of things. One, I've never done a cover before. I did do a George Kayanis song called Over 21 on the Correspondence album because I loved the song. At the time, it had never been released. I heard a demo of it. And my version is the first version of it that was released. So it was a song that I didn't write, but it wasn't strictly, let's say, a cover in the usual sense of the word. Other than that, I'd never done a cover. I'd never done a cover of a known song already released by a major artist. But we thought it would be fun to do a Bowie cover. And Leah loves Bowie, and it's Absolute Beginners is not that well No, it is known. Of course, it was a film theme and everything, but it's not one of his most known songs. And we wanted to do something that was somewhat of a more deep cut. So one of the reasons to do it was, in a way, I wanted to sort of thank Bowie kind of belatedly, admittedly, and also pay a little homage to an artist that I think is one of the great artists, you know. And he's also in a style of artist that I very much belong to, you know, an artist again that strives for originality, takes influences from different styles of music. And so I relate to Bowie's approach, and I also admire him greatly as an innovator, a songwriter, a showman, you know, extraordinary shows that he could put on, a great performer, one I was lucky enough to see many times. And I met him I met him once in my life, and that was the year that we released our first album and our first single, Criminal World. And I don't know if there's a connection. I can't prove it or disprove it, other than I was introduced to him by Bianca Jagger. It's too big a story to tell you why, but I was, so I happened to know her in the Embassy nightclub in London. And we had a brief conversation where he's a very charming, nice man, where he just sort of said, oh, you know, what do you do? And I said, I do what you do, only I'm just starting out. I've got a single coming out soon, you know, and I've got an album. And I told him the name of the band. So maybe that is the connection, because in an interview on the Radio 1, when Let's Dance was released with Kit Jensen, he said that he bought the album and that he liked many tracks on it, but that was his favorite. And that's why he covered it. So probably, possibly, who knows? There is some kind of connection with the random meeting of the man.
Talk a little bit about the progress with the new album, with Regeneration. How's that coming along?
Well, basically the album is finished. I'm just about to listen to some new mastering that Michael Briggs at Civil Audio has just given me. We got it to a certain point, we liked it, then he just was just doing a couple of tweaks. And it's basically the album is there, but we have a love of this album, as you can tell from this long interview and all our dialogue about it.
Yeah. We
We want it to have its audience. And so we're trying to build interest in Regeneration, you know, with, first of all, Beautiful Boy, Absolute Beginners, maybe then 4 o'clock in the morning. We're not going to put it out until we get we're looking for a champion, you know, like someone to help with the marketing and the pushing it to that, you know, that you can still get from labels if they love you enough, you know, there's got to be the love. We're looking for that sort of love, or a sync, maybe a break where the sync takes us on. I don't mean on the Kate Bush level running up that hill, but it'd be nice, you know, but right. Something that takes the music to above and beyond our audiences, right, to a larger audience, but it's just waiting there. So any record company executive listening in, just, you know, just knock on our door, you know, because the album is sounding great and we pretty much feel it's finished. You know, it's one of those things where you can always then say, oh, well, no, I think this is it. It's been a long journey because it's been in between Leah doing her touring, her records with Rosegarden, and some other projects that she has. But it's been interesting because we took our time as well. It's allowed lots of other things to get in there in the process and us to develop our process, as we said earlier, in an instinctive way, but still, I think it's all part of the journey. That it's been a long journey, you know, because we started it. Our first recording for us was sort of summer of 2 years ago. Yeah. So, but we haven't been. It's not that we've been in the studio ever since. You know, we've been waiting for the right moment to come in on and do another track. You know, around especially around Leah's schedule, which is kind of quite busy. You know, she's a busy bee. Yeah, she is. Sounds a very talented bee. Excuse me. So that's sort of where we're at with the album. It's there, but I can't give you a release date. Okay. I can give you the release date for the old Godwin stuff that a lot of people have been waiting for years, me included. That Polydor are finally going to put that out on the 5th of May. And the rest, if you haven't looked, is out there. It's on all the major platforms. Anything that's not released on the 5th of May is already out there. So, but for for the Regeneration album, people just have to be supportive of what we do put out, give it the love, stream it to death, share it to death on every TikToky, Instagrammy, Facebooky, every kind of medium, every kind of FM, any kind of radio. Just please, everyone tuning in, hearing me now, help us, because everyone needs help. And the more you help us, the easier it is for us to get it to you. Do let me know when it's going out. Every kind of link you can give me that I can use. I can even tell the distributor Believe, so that they like to know when things are happening. It helps apparently. So keep me posted on all of that, and I'll share it in every way I can.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Peter. You and Leah. Be sure and thank her again.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, Greg. It's great to get to know you a bit as well. Like your style. I think definitely friends, right?
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
I'll
I'll leave first so you don't start crying. I'm going.